Hey, welcome everybody to the 236th recording of CACOR's presentations. We're honored today to have Dick Bakker, who, fellow Dutchman as he is, he's been operating a microgrid solar system and is part of the Ottawa Renewable Energy Cooperative, and I'll tell you all about that. And we're also honored to have John Kirkwood, who's the president of OREC. He's been leading the strategic planning, communications, advocacy, and has done a lot to push OREC forward. I sure hope that in the coming months that Ford will take a few tips from OREC, because this back and forth in energy on, energy off, back and forth the US, I think we have to do a lot more in terms of interdependency in amongst Canadians rather than trying to sell our energy to the US market. But all of that said, let's move on. Well, I should mention one other thing. If you have a question, please put in the chat. Precede your question with a Q, and if it's just a comment, put a C before your comment. Because I'll keep a list of your questions as we go on, and we'll take questions at the end.
Is it over us, Richard? I guess so. Okay, terrific. Thanks very much, everybody. My name is John Kirkwood. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks for the opportunity, Art and Richard, for us to be able to present. Dick will be presenting some of this content, and we're going to talk today about OREC and empowering Ontario communities with renewable energy. So we'll start with a little bit of background about who OREC is, if you don't know, and what we do. We'll talk about the projects that we have and where we've had successes and some of the challenges in future. And then we'll do a little bit of a focus on OREx Community Exchange, because it highlights some of the important pieces of OREC and how we help communities and individuals like yourself help communities with renewable energy. So first of all, who is OREC? I'll try not to read the slides. It is a cooperative. It was started back in 2010 in the FIT era, and Dick's going to talk about what FIT means. But it was a change in policy for Ontario, and it was literally half a dozen neighbors sitting around a kitchen table saying, how can we make a difference? How can we contribute? That was the start of OREC. So it started as a cooperative. We're now up to almost 1,100 members from across Ontario, mainly the Ottawa region. We identify and finance and build renewable energy projects like solar, and we have some wind projects as well. We'll talk about that. We are a for-profit cooperative, but the profits go to our members. So it's not going to some remote institution or corporation. It's going to our members. We're very lean, very small, and our overhead is very little because of that. So the majority of the money we collect goes towards our projects. And we also partner both within industry as well as through governments, and also the partners that we work with to build our projects. In terms of what we do, we break it down into 5 things. So the first is our communities. So we are membership-based. And like I said, we're over almost 1,100 members now. And those members are the collective. That's what we're oriented around. And a big part of our efforts is getting the word out about OREC and growing our membership. And there's a number of benefits to membership, which we'll also talk about a little bit later on. The second thing is that we develop and build renewable energy projects. And like I said, Dick will talk about some of those projects, but we're not just a bunch of ideas. We're actually making a difference. We're actually generating renewable energy. We're actually reducing the carbon footprint for Ontario. And again, we'll talk about that. The third thing we do is we raise capital. Renewable energy projects tend to be capital intensive upfront. So you pay a lot of money upfront, but then the payoff is for decades going down the road. But we need capital up front to be able to build those projects. And that capital comes primarily from our members. About half of our members are investors and about half aren't. So you can join OREC and you don't need to be investors, but you can. The fourth thing is we manage those projects. That's kind of day-to-day operations, and it's generally pretty straightforward. There's not tons of maintenance on renewable energy projects, the ones that we've identified. So that's the fourth thing. And then the last thing is policies have changed in Ontario from when OREC was started. There are a lot of challenges today, and we're continuing to fight on our behalf, on renewable energy behalf, and on our members' behalf to improve the policies and enable more renewable energy to be created in Ontario. So those are kind of the 5 things we do. Now I'm going to switch over to Dick, who's going to talk a little bit about Ontario and the situation and OREX projects.
Okay, thank you, John. So this slide is something very few Ontarians have probably seen. This is from the IESO website, the Independent Electricity Systems Operator. That's the entity that purchases power and plans for the future. And what you're seeing is 3 little dots where the 3 nuclear generating facilities are. And those numbers beside those names represent the generation capacity at those sites. So 30% of all of Ontario's electricity at once could come from Bruce. Darlington is 16, Pickering is 14. So that generation is not all operating at the same time, but it could be 60% of our electricity. It's generally between 52 and 50 to 60%, 55 to 60%. 70% of all the electricity coming to Eastern Ontario is coming through this little choke point. And that thick line, or those thick lines that you see, are high tension transmission lines that are designed to take the power from those big nuclear plants to somewhere. So we in Ottawa and Eastern Ontario get relatively little of our electricity from within this region, and that's a core problem. So our electricity is not very resilient in the supply side of it. If you look at your electricity bill, you'll see quite a high percentage of your electricity bill is for the delivery component. Relatively, but less than 50 to 45% of it is the commodity of electricity. The rest is regulatory and delivery. So this is the same picture in graphic form. And the sources of power are mostly nuclear, some water, wind, a little bit of solar for the peak hour times, a little bit of increasingly natural gas. But it comes through a long line to a transformer in your neighborhood and then delivered to your home. That's the past. It's called centralized generation. You could also look at it as a central computer system. Next slide, please, or next graph, John. Where we're going is a much more internet-oriented system where you have generation closer to home and you have little cells that are working independently and coordinated together. It's much more efficient. It's cheaper to run and operate. It's more complex, but so is the internet relative to the way the telephone and computer systems were 40 years ago. I come out of the computer industry, so I look at the power industry from the lens of lines and wires and central generation versus who's consuming the power. The consumption of power in Ontario is at every home, business, place of work and play. So we're moving to a distributed type of system, and that's what DER is, distributed energy resources. And that is not solar or wind, it is solar and wind and power generation and power reduction when you don't need to use that service. Anyway, next slide. It's a little more complex than what we're used to in the past. So what has OREC done? Over the, I guess 12 years now, 15 years, sorry, since we were created in 2010, we have bought, purchased, acquired, built 24 solar systems, 2 tracking solar systems, 2 systems of 500 kilowatts, 2 wind projects that we purchased, actually 5 energy retrofit projects that we've financed, and we are working on a number of other things. So we have a portfolio of 30 some projects that are generating power and generating an income stream. And in the graphics there, you'll see a bunch of dots. Most of them are around Ottawa in Eastern Ontario, 2 of them in the cottage country north of Toronto, and then the 2 wind turbines along Georgian Bay, Lake Huron. Next slide. These are 4 of the projects. I don't know if you can see, if you're at the bottom right-hand corner is one of our 2 turbines, a school, Maurice Lepointe High School in the French Public School Board, Hovey Industries south of the airport. That's one of the first high-tech companies in Ottawa from the 40s, in the early 50s, and then off of Leitrim Road, and then the ground mount in Alfred Plantagenet. So that ground mount system is tilting during the course of the day. So these are 4 of our operating systems today. Next slide.
Yeah,
please.
you can actually see, you can just see the people there. The shadows are going to the left.
Right.
So these
right.
are pointing north-south. So in the morning
Yeah.
they face east, and then they flip over and point west in the afternoon.
Yeah, they're single axis tracking, so
Yeah.
they're a dual axis, so they're turning east-west.
Yeah.
Whereas the other ones are all oriented in one direction, fixed. So the types of projects we're working on, you see the very top line, feed-in tariffs. Those are the contracts that the Liberal government issued for 8 years between 2009 and 18. There are no new FIT contracts since 18, but we have 19 such contracts now. Those contracts are for 20 years, and they are guaranteed to pay if we deliver electricity. So they're fixed price contracts for the 20 years. That's how long-term electricity projects are procured. Every large project in the province is procured on some manner of fixed price for the duration of that contract. Those nukes were supposed to be running for 50 to 60 years. They have never met that timeline. They've all been retrofitted within the first 25 years. So they've never operated for the length. The feed-in tariff contracts will be operating well beyond the 20-year term. So anyway, we have 19 of those contracts. Half of them we built ourselves. The other half we purchased in one way or another. We did 5 energy retrofits. We now have, I think, 3 that are still under contract. The first 2 are paid out and completed. We also have 3 net metering projects. I don't know of another renewable energy co-op that has done any of these. These are projects where we sell the power to the building. That is allowed in Ontario. So we were the first renewable energy co-op to try that type of scenario. That will grow in the future because it's more effective, efficient to generate power closer to the demand. As I said earlier, we have purchased feed-in tariff contracts from other people, and we will buy more going forward. 2 of ours are wind projects, and there's actually a little more than 4 that we've purchased over the years. And we will do more, hopefully, large transmission connected solar and wind. That's a trickier business because those projects, the people buying and planning the system are used to massive megawatt type projects, which is not what we believe they should be doing, but that's the mindset of the present electricity system. We are talking to large developers about partnering with them on some of the LT2 procurements that are becoming in the next couple of years. These are 5 to 100 megawatt style projects. Not what we want to do, but it's the only large procurement that is planned at this point in time. Then below, you'll see a number of cross marks, just things that are not allowed, but are being done all through the US and Europe. So community solar, that's where there's a solar project like a FIT project, sort of, but we sell the power to members. So you could have your electricity at home offset by power that is being produced on a OREC project at another location. So it's like net metering, but virtually to your house. Virtual power plants, that's where we would possibly combine 50 to 100 end users who have solar on their home with our expired FIT contracts and pool them as a virtual power plant, a big system that is actually spread across the area, across the region. And we're releasing power from those sites from the solar system and or from a battery that is time shifting that power. If you're just releasing it from a solar system, you can only produce power exactly when the sun's shining. If a cloud goes over, you get a little less power at that moment. But if you can combine that with a battery and demand response to turn down consumption, you can release power across a broader area that is mixing with time and with cloud and with wind or less wind, and thereby have a more balanced system in that region. So it's a little more complicated, but that's how the internet works. You're pooling resources from across a region. Not allowed in Ontario, is allowed in other regions. Nova Scotia is looking at it very seriously. Alberta is way ahead of Ontario on this stuff. Texas is way ahead of Ontario on this stuff. Not what you'd expect, but that is the truth. The other thing is batteries can be operated as a service. Hybrid systems of wind, solar, and batteries, and other forms of community net metering. So those are the things that we are lobbying the provincial government, the IESO, the Ontario Energy Board, and our dear friends at Hydro Ottawa and Hydro One. Next slide, please.
So back to me, I think, on this one, Dick.
There. Yep, there you go.
So thanks for that. But quite a lot of background at a high level about what we do and the scale and the scope of it. I'm happy to answer questions later on. For the last part of our presentation, we're going to focus on a new feature that we've got called OREx, and it does two things at a high level. One is that it's a forum. I mean, we have this incredible membership of almost 1,100 people, many of whom are highly knowledgeable and experienced with renewable energy. And we often get questions going, oh, I want to put in a heat pump, but it's so complicated, I don't know where to start. And so we thought, how can we enable our membership to do more? So we've created this OREX Community Exchange, which I'm going to show you. And one of the things is it allows members to share their experiences in a structured way, and for both members and the general public, at least, to find out about people who have resources that they're researching. And I'll show that to you. The second reason we did it, and this is to Dick's credit, is if you have solar on your roof, you may have a microfit contract which pays you for the electricity you put into the grid. Those are going to expire starting in 2029 through 2038. Officially, there's nothing afterwards that's going to give you credit for that. And so we're trying to collect this database of our members' resources so that we can, and I'll go back to this slide, we can continue to campaign for virtual power plants to the delegations we speak to. And we speak to the ministry, we speak to the Ontario Energy Board, we speak to the IESO regulator, and we speak to the local utilities. At every level, we're fighting for these things. And one of the things we're fighting for is to enable a future for the resources you have on your homes in a smart, intelligent way that's going to help with resiliency and get you some credit to get you paid for that. So those are the two things it does. And I'm going to switch to a demo. Are we seeing my other screen now? I'm starting in this view just to show everything that I show you today can work on a mobile phone. You don't even need to go to the App Store. You just open the link or use the QR code that's in the presentation, and it will open. But for today's demonstration, I'm going to do it in a full browser view because it works equally well in a browser. So what I'm showing you here is My OREC, and My OREC is our user portal app. So in fact, it gives you a personal way of accessing OREC resources, and so that the app knows who you are and can take that into account. It works for both members and non-members with different features available, of course. So the first thing is, if I was a member, in this case, it's my fictional member and investor, I could update my membership information. I could gift a membership. I could add a resource to OREX, which I'm going to show you in a minute. I could also look at the investing resources. So I could look at my investments if I had any. I could open up the investment and impact calculator, which would estimate, you know, what would an investment at OREC do? How much would I get paid for that? What would be the impact from a greenhouse gas standpoint? So that's one of our investing tools. I can look at all the live data from our projects. So these are all the projects Dick talked about. You can see the map that you saw in the slide, and you can click on any one of these and open up the profile and see the data on it, that kind of thing. And you can even vote. We're a membership, so we actually conduct some of the voting that we do for our members through my OREC. So that at a very high level is what my OREC is about. And there's more. I invite you to try it out. Even if you're not a member, there's still some of those features available, like the project page, for example. We're going to focus on OREX Community Exchange. So this is what you would see as a member. So as a member, it already knows what my address is. So it knows where I'm starting to look for things, because it's going to take that into account when it shows you the resources. The next thing you want to do is you want to pick a category that you're interested in. Say I'm researching electric vehicles. As soon as I pick electric vehicles, I see dozens and dozens, literally almost 100 electric vehicles, mainly in Ottawa. By default, they're sorted by how far away they are from me, but I could say, well, I want to know somebody who's bought one recently. So I could sort it by date, that kind of thing. If I looked at solar panels, I get the same thing, a different list of solar panels, and again, the details on them, the capacity, all that kind of thing. I could click on one of them and I get a profile. In this case, this member, look, there's even a photo that they've uploaded with a little bit of a description. In this case, the user said, somebody else could contact me, but I want to be able to filter that. So we don't share a member's information, obviously. In this case, it would send them an email saying, an investor is interested in learning more about your solar roof. Would you reach out to them? Okay. But for this demonstration, I'm going to focus on heat pumps. So here I have got my list of heat pumps. Again, I could look at a map and I could say, show me all the heat pumps. And I could zoom in on any one of these and open them up. In this case, I'm going to use the list. I can filter this list and say, well, you know what? I'm interested in geothermal. That's the heat pump I'm interested in. And even for geothermal, we've got several dozen geothermal systems, it looks like. But you know what? Even more so, I'm interested in ground geothermal system. So here's a couple. They're not very close to me. Maybe that's not a surprise, because this person fictionally lives downtown and it's hard to put geothermal downtown. But this one looks interesting. I can look it up, and again, I can find out when it was acquired. They have shared their contact information, the size of it, how far it is, and even a little description that they've gave. And look, this is kind of interesting. You're in luck. Art Hunter has shared his phone number and he shared his email address. So if I was on my cell phone, I could literally phone him right there and then. So this is about enabling you to make connections with people, to learn things that you'd like. In this case, I could email him, and we don't see this email, by the way. You can write whatever you like, but it's just going to do a template that opens it up and shares that you're interested in this particular resource. We don't have to send it, but hang on, just take one moment. There we go. Art, I'm interested in your heat pump, and you can write a message to Art and send it to him. I'm also a member of OREC, and I'd like to learn more about your heat pump. So by the way, this feature isn't available to non-members. You have to be a member to be able to make a connection with somebody or even to reach out to them. Okay, so that I think is all the pieces I wanted to show here. Yeah, I think that's just about it. There's obviously another page as a member to add your resources, and we try to make it as easy as possible. Are you adding an EV, or are you adding a solar installation? You know, what's the size of it? What's the scale? If it's energy generating, then we ask you what type of contract. Is it microfit? Is it net metering? That kind of thing. All of these make it easier for other people to find information they're interested in. And so you search it. And the value add of this system is unlike a Facebook group where you'd say, hey, I want to find out about ground heat pumps in my neighborhood, and you just hope somebody's reading that day and will write back to you. This way, it allows, we have this database that people can find it at their leisure and with the exact details that they need, and then the dialogue can start after there. So now I'll switch back to our presentation deck. So again, OREx Community Exchange. Members can share their resources and experience, and some of them have very long descriptions going, well, we started to do it this way, and then we did that, and we took these solar panels, we brought them to the cottage, and this is what worked, whatever, that's up to the member. The public can search for these things so that they know that there's people that know those kinds of things, but you have to be a member to be able to engage and learn more. You just get a short description. You don't get the full description. And then it invites dialogue between members so that you can share information. And we've made a little video, basically what I've just done right now. But if you're seeing this presentation, or if you only see the presentation deck, then you can just run that little video. And again, there's the QR code to open up OREX at that link. Okay, and that we're a little bit short. Oh, we're actually quite a bit short. So that's the main presentation. On this final slide, you can see that we're kind of promoting joining OREC. It involves the $100 one-time lifetime membership. So it's just $100 to join, and that supports our advocacy work. It supports the community. And I will say, frankly, the numbers make a difference. Literally, when we're talking to, for example, the provincial government, we'd love to be able to say, we represent 5,000 Ontario citizens who care about renewable energy. So the bigger that number of members, it makes a big difference. Likewise with developers, we'll often partner with other organizations that develop renewable energy, but at a much bigger scale than we can afford. But it's important to have somebody like OREC as part of your proposal team, because OREC is representing communities. For example, battery projects are often rejected by communities if it's an external developer coming in and saying, I want to use up 80 acres of your land and all the profits are going to go far away to other people, much less chance of success. Whereas we try and bring that community representation and community buy-in to contribute to the success of renewable energy projects. So one-time $100 to join. And why would you do it? A couple of reasons. One, we're making a difference. We're actually building renewable energy and reducing the carbon footprint for Ontario. And especially if you live in an apartment building or you rent and you can't do, for example, solar panels, or you don't drive a car that you could be an EV, then we're actually putting your dollars to work. The second is be part of this community. We're representing neighborhoods. We're representing your neighbors. We're trying to make a difference from the ground up. And OREX is one of those ways that you can actively be engaged and participate. And the third is an investment opportunity. We literally will pay you money to help us build renewable energy. You can invest in a TFSA or an RSP, and we will pay you dividends on an annual basis, depending on how much money we made that year, but the profits come back to you. And after 10 years, typically, depends on the offering, all your money is returned, all your capital is returned, plus you've made those dividends. In the meantime, we've offset a lot of carbon emissions that would otherwise be coming from natural gas systems, and especially in Ontario, which is rising. So with that, I think I will finish our presentation. Unless, Dick, there was anything that you think we had to add before we go to questions?
Maybe just to emphasize that we're a community of friends who with some knowledge on this subject. So if you want to learn about the renewable energy industry and how this energy transition will evolve, I think you would be wise to join, because there's a lot of people who have knowledge and experience of differing levels. And the investment side, people ask, what's the rate of return? Our objective is to get to a steady state of 4% or growing dividend. We've done that a few times, not every year, but going forward, now that we're at a scale that can continue to grow and be stronger, we've done the hard lifting of growing from 5 people and $500 around the table to now 34 projects, 12 years of paying capital back and dividends every year. We have very little debt. Of all the utilities, we are effectively a utility. We are most debt averse. We have one project with Oshawa Power. They're used to 90% debt. Ottawa Hydro has 80, 90% debt. All the utilities, the key thing about utilities is they're there to borrow money and pay a dividend on a small amount that they really invest.
Mm.
Right? Utilities are a pension fund driven business. They are the safest investment for the most risk adverse people. So big pension funds, big banks love utilities because they get a guaranteed rate of return. We don't, except with the FIT contracts, we've got a guaranteed payment. If we deliver power, we get paid, right? But all utilities work on a guaranteed rate of return. The more they spend, the more they earn. So they want to build more of the same lines and transmission stations. They don't necessarily want to do the right thing for the rate base, which is distributed, localized, and more confusing on the surface stuff of this DER stuff. I'll be quiet now.
So well, we're going to go to questions. So Richard and
Yep.
Art, I think you've stopped sharing my screen, which is great. I see some questions in the chat. Shall we go through them, or do you want to?
Yeah. I was going to take you
manage
through
those?
them. I'm going to
Okay,
take
great.
you through them in order. So, actually, as moderator, I'll ask the first question. What percent would you project? I know this is hard to answer, but how much would you project the cost of energy will go up, say, over the next 5 years, 10 years, something like that? Can you give us any idea of that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Dick has lots of thoughts on that.
Yeah. So everybody should, when we finish this session, everyone go home and look at your electricity bill in Ontario. You'll see
Okay.
three components. There's a price for the electrons. There's another price that, depending on where you live, is bigger or smaller than 50%. And that's for delivery and regulatory. And then there is the infamous little known Ontario electricity rebate. That's a subsidy from your tax pocket to unrestrained subsidy to everybody for leaving the lights on. You're now getting 13.2% of your total cost back as a taxpayer subsidy. Thank you for leaving your lights on. November 1st, that was reduced from 19.3%. So your bill should be 13% higher than it is. So
we actually did a blog posting about that if you want more details.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things we do as well.
So with that in mind, anything Mr. Ford says or any of the journalists say about future prices of electricity, they're under I don't know what it's going to be because it's so politicized, but it should be 13% higher than it is today. Nobody wants to hear that. I'm not running for politics, so I'll tell you this. It's got to go up, and it'll be driven up by the rating agencies, because what could we do with $6 billion a year? That's what we're spending to leave lights on that aren't needed. If we're paying that extra 13%, people will turn off more lights, and then we wouldn't need the nukes as much, right? Because we're incented to be wasteful today.
But the current bill, Dick, doesn't include the forecast for the maintenance and upgrade of nuclear, which there's a huge bill coming, right? So whatever it is now, it might go up more.
Yeah. The other thing is that there's 5 major nuclear plants that have been approved that total $108 billion. But they don't talk about all the transmission and distribution upgrades that'll be required to bring that power from the same 3 locations, Darlington, Pickering, and Bruce, to the, 20 million homes and businesses and locations that are receiving electricity in Ontario. So if you're going to increase that amount of power in those 3 distant locations from Ottawa, okay, it's not distant from Whitby, but it is far from Ottawa. You have to upgrade the lines to get it to your house and my house and somebody else's house, right? That's not in the plan. They do say it's $108 billion. if they're on time and on budget, which I
Mm-hmm.
guarantee you they won't be.
Yeah.
So we have a nuclear explosion in cost, and we have an underpriced Ontario electricity rebate subsidy for the wealthy and middle class. There's another couple of $1 billion of targeted support for the poor. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the freebie Ontario electricity rebate that nobody wants to talk about.
Please.
So,
David, you had a question, and after that, it's I don't know, Jeff. If he's not here, I'll ask a question for him. Jeff Strong. So,
Good
David.
afternoon, John.
Hi.
I noticed on looking at your website the last couple of days that there are a large number of organizations that are attached somehow to your organization. And since I'm a member of CACOR, I wondered what would be involved, or what would be the rationale for our organization to become attached, partnered, whatever the right term is, to OREC.
Well, I'll give my 2 cents and then Dick can jump in. We are individual member based, as opposed to other organizations who might do partnerships, direct partnerships with other organizations. Our members are all individuals. The names of organizations that you're going to see on our website is probably related to the projects, and that's because when we build something, it's typically with a big consumer. So it's not an individual, it's with an organization like a school, like a museum. And we will partner with organizations to that extent. We also partner, as I say, with implementers, because we don't have full staff on board to build the renewable energy projects. We have maintenance. We're looking actually currently, as we try to grow and expand our membership, to partner with other organizations. We haven't spec'd out exactly what that would look like, because again, we're a co-op of individuals, but we are absolutely interested, and we do engage with other organizations. This is one presentation we made last year. I know off the top of my head, we had 22 public appearances. So we do definitely engage and we collaborate with other organizations, but we don't currently have formal associations, right, Dick? Anything to add on that? No.
sorry. Yes, I was on mute there. Yeah, we have several, we work with other entities that take an environmental or electricity, that have an interest in environmental, energy, and financial things that relate to what we're doing. So we will speak and present to any group that is a network of suspicious or suspected members. Basically, we want to grow our membership.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to have met Bob Shirelli when he was minister 4 different times. And each time, the first thing he wanted to know was what our membership was.
Yeah.
We are 1,100 members, offered by a few. That is 3,500 voters, because one member is part of a family of some extended group. That's 3,500, 4,000 people who have a vested interest in renewable energy, in the financial viability of what we've spent money on, whether you've invested in OREC projects and or in your own, because our advocacy is about community and individual scale type projects. We're not advocating for a 100 megawatt solar farm. I don't like 50 wind turbines in one place. That's just another big centralized power plant that is actually less efficient, because you got to build the connection to that 50 wind turbines for the peak load. But the peak load is like this over time. Wind is stronger in the winter time when it's colder, and in the evening. Solar is stronger in the summertime, and 60% of its power is in 5 months. So combining solar and wind, spreading it around, is more efficient than concentrating solar and concentrating wind, or concentrating anything. You want to mix it up and spread it around. So when we advocate to the regulators and the utilities, it is about community owned and individually owned.
Right.
And let me just add to that, because it raises an interesting point. We're looking at battery energy storage systems best, partly because one of the complaints about renewables is, well, you can't depend on them if it's not windy that week or if it's not sunny. So storage buffers you from that kind of issue. And also storage is very critical because the whole electricity system is oriented around a half dozen times a year when we hit that absolute peak. You have to scale it for that maximum, and the rest of the time you've got excess capacity. Whereas storage kind of reduces that demand. It says, well, for those half dozen times you need extra, we'll have the battery at the ready. So storage is a big part of the solution, and especially for renewable energy. We haven't done storage yet because, surprise, the current regulations, they don't really handle storage very well. The first question a utility wants to ask you is, are you a consumer or are you a producer of energy? Well, we're actually kind of a bit of both, and we take that energy from the grid, and there's not an economic model that works. We've been fighting for this one for the last year, and we will continue to fight for it because the policies in Ontario are not amenable to more progressive and more modern and established hybrid solutions like are existing elsewhere in the world. So we're definitely, this is something we're working towards for everybody's benefit.
Another way of looking at it is the system that we have inherited from the last 100 years was designed 150 years on the assumption that there wasn't a business in electricity. So they had to incent the first players with a guaranteed monopoly on the production and sale of this new thing called electricity. But we now know there is a business in electricity, and it's a long business. It's there forever. You can't pump your gas without electricity. You can't make your coffee. So battery and solar and this whole DER concept, or the virtual power plant of many systems working together, is like a great big sponge that releases water and absorbs it as the whole system needs it. We are used to a big power plant over there pushing the power to us. And lo and behold, if you're the farmer at the end of a long line in rural Ontario, they're pushing the power down that line as hard as they can to get to the very end of the line. Right? So farmers were having light bulbs blowing until a solar system was connected in the middle, and then they had to start cleaning up the infrastructure. So the feed-in tariff program 17 years ago when it started was actually forcing the utility to clean up their rural lines. But it caused a lot of grief, and everyone blamed the solar. It wasn't solar. It was the fact that they never had to clean up their lines because it was all designed to be pushing power down long lines. Anyway.
Let's go, David, that's way off tangent from your question, but thanks
I know,
for that.
But it was interesting.
On behalf of Jeff Strong, I was going to say, he asked the question, your Ottawa renewable energy, your cumulative total, or the total of all your Ottawa renewable was about 3,400 kilowatts. What is the total electric requirement for the Ottawa area as a whole? Do you have any idea?
I don't know right now, but it's a couple of thousand times more than what we can produce right now.
Yeah.
Ottawa produces 10% of its own power.
So you're saying renewable energy as a percentage of what is supplying Ottawa is a tiny percent.
Tiny. Ottawa, within Hydro Ottawa's territory, is only produced about 10% of what Hydro Ottawa uses or delivers.
Big difference from Norway, which is over 98%.
Well, yeah, yeah, Norway's a lot of mountains, and they're blessed with hydro everywhere. Our hydro is at the other end of the province and in the north. And and also Cornwall. So Ottawa gets 10% of its power from within its border. Eastern Ontario gets about 20% because of Cornwall and a couple of dams up the valley. Solar, for the most part, is considered demand reduction. It's not considered generation. So anyway, these are technicalities. I tend to get caught up in them because I've lived it so closely the last few years. But our whole system is designed around getting power from far away.
Yeah.
Okay. You're on deck. Sorry, actually, you're up next.
Yeah, I just was asking if you could explain more about the virtual power projects,
Virtual power plant.
plant.
Yeah.
So
So
virtual power.
I'll start by saying it's not allowed in Ontario. But anyone who has a Canadian pension fund pension has invested in it. So the Canadian pension fund has last December purchased part ownership in a company in Britain called Octopus, which has a product offering called Raken, I think. And that offering is provided in Britain and parts of Europe, and I think in Texas. And it is a virtual power plant service. So again, think of a sponge that can a sponge that goes across Eastern Ontario, and it's 400 little microfits after the contract's over that are generating electricity, releasing it into the grid, or putting it in a battery and releasing it 2 hours later. Okay. At the same time, it might be 500 homes with hot water tanks that are designed to reduce consumption, and or thermostats that are turned down or turned up. So it's both generation and demand response. So it's systems spread across a geography responding to the dynamic flow and need of the electricity system in that geography. Right now, it's just being pushed to us, and they're hoping we're going to consume it at the same rate. But we all know we go to sleep at night, we turn things off. And then we get up in the morning and we turn things on, and we come home from work in the late afternoon and turn on more things. So our demand cycle goes like this, kind of predictable, but not perfectly predictable. So it's a supply and demand at the local level that is following or working in advance of the overall demand.
Thanks for the question, Yura. To give you a practical example, the largest virtual power plant in the world that I know of is in California, where thousands and thousands of residential batteries. So think of something that, a couple of square feet that goes on the wall in your garage. So a lot of homes there have these batteries, both because of the price of electricity, so they can offset, and also because of the blackouts. And this virtual power plant is using software to basically connect these thousands of batteries. And when there is a blackout, they can instantaneously start providing electricity to the grid in a distributed manner. So you can imagine the power of this, right? You're reducing dependency on a centralized source, on centralized transmission. You're reusing and enabling distributed energy resources. You're maximizing the value of that. Those members are actually getting paid for the electricity at a high rate because it's suddenly in very high demand. And you're increasing resiliency. So that's an example of a virtual power plant. And again, Dick says, this is not possible in Ontario today because in Ontario's current regulations, everything is, they talk about in front of the meter has to be with an individual electricity bill. So the idea of saying, hey, can these 73 people who all have the same idea, can you work with us together so that our resources are pooled? No, can't do it. It's like, how much can you pull from one electricity bill, or how much can you contribute from one electricity bill? This idea of doing virtual net metering and connecting accounts virtually is one that's not currently permitted in Ontario.
So can I just ask as a follow-up, what would be involved in advocating to have that model adopted? Like, what needs to happen? What arguments do you need to make?
We're
kind of a big question, right?
Well, we had those discussions just before the election, then they went quiet with the Ministry of Energy and Electrification. So now that the election is over and the same government's in with the same ministers, we'll see. But I think Ontario will not do anything on this until two things happen. One is the microfits start coming off contract. So 6 months before that, they'll get really serious. And the other thing is the laws under which local distribution companies, on Ottawa Hydro, Hydro One, Toronto Hydro, the laws that they operate under say that they can only be a distributor. They need to be market players. And so anyway, there's some structural hindrances there because of the history of the electricity system. So it's a very Kafkaesque world.
I think it's worth highlighting, and Dick made this point, I know, because I was there as well, at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. That's a big meeting that happens once a year. It's super important. I was surprised to know that there were 33 ministers from the Ontario government on the stage on the final day. So the government really listens to the AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. And there was a session on this, and Dick got up and talked about this point, and he said, I don't believe that the main issue is technical. It's not like, oh, it's so complicated to connect all these virtual accounts. And the representatives from Hydro One said, you're right, the biggest problem is not technical. It's political. It's about the will to change, the will not, frankly, to favor the major producers, OPG, Ontario Power Generation, which does nuclear energy, Enbridge, which does natural gas. The current system favors those major producers, and there's not the willingness at this point to say, hey, let's focus more on distributed energy, which is both cheaper and more resilient. So that's our battle.
And sorry, what can I ask one more on this? Like, just if 10 homeowners with solar panels and turbines decided that they just wanted to do that on their own, like in some little municipality somewhere, and we're just going to form our own little co-op arrangement. What would stop them? Like, is there a law that says we can't just form our own little local co-ops of 5 or 10 or 15?
Well, sorry, Nero, what are they doing? What are they putting solar on their home? That's fine.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if they had that capacity and then had whatever exchange mechanism they need to share the power.
You cannot sell electricity unless you're a licensed LDC.
So what if we don't sell it? What if we just share it?
Yeah.
No. You cannot trade electricity unless you're an LDC.
Dick, hang on. I think there's a simple way. Nira, it makes a difference whether it's what we call in front of the meter, i.e. it's connected to the grid, or behind the meter. Behind the meter is kind of like your private area. You can do whatever you like, right? And in theory, if you did wiring between these properties, I don't know if you get a regulation for that, then the utility doesn't really see it or know about it, and there's no danger. As soon as any of those solar systems are connected to the grid and could potentially feed power, now it gets much more complicated. So not only is it complicated technically, coordinating those resources once they're hitting the grid is not possible. In theory, like you say, you could do it on your own, kind of behind the meter, as in we're just going to run cables between our houses.
Right.
I don't know if you get approval to do that from a zoning standpoint, but in theory, you could do it from a utility standpoint.
So I just think that in terms of these co-housing movements that are getting up and running so much more for affordable community living, that people like that could be setting them up from the start with that kind of arrangement, right?
So now
they knew it was a possibility.
Yeah. So now I'll get into some other practicalities. The Electrical Safety Authority and the electricians would not wire from one building to another building, because that's what the LDC's role is. If those 10 buildings were all touching one another, you could run wires between them because they're all behind the meter, as John said. But could you then get insurance if you have electrical wires not approved by the Electrical Safety Authority? And my electrician, who I know very well, he's a good friend, but he will not do anything because he said the Electrical Safety Authority doesn't take the risk. It's the electrician who does.
I see.
Okay. So Phil, you have a question.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Kara.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have a microfit system. I was within the first 50 in Ontario to have a ground-mounted one. I'm elderly. I'm having to sell my house. So that was the reason why I was asking the question of before or at the time that my contract ends, is there any contract that can be passed on to a new owner of this property? I think your answer in the chat box said, no, there's not going to be any contracts. So therefore,
No, I didn't say that. What I said is today, there is no clarity as I didn't use this word. I should have used this word. There's no clarity today as to what's going to happen at the end of the microfit. 2 weeks before the election was called, I was invited to a meeting with the IESO about what to do at the end of FIT and microfits. And then they canceled the meeting because of the election. So they are starting to think of it.
And I think a piece to add to that, Phil, is by the government's own estimates, we're going to need 70% more electricity by 2050. In other words, demand continues to increase. How much is, debatable, but by most estimates, it's going to increase. In our mind, the government is going to need every kilowatt they can get. So
Yes.
even though there is no official path post-FIT or post-microfit, we believe they'll be coming to the table saying, okay, here's what we plan to do, at whatever rate that might be. So we're building on the assumption that there's going to be a lifespan for these projects for revenue from those systems, aside from the energy that they could produce for the facility that they're on. So that's what we're working towards, is saying with the assumption that you're going to need every piece of renewable energy, how is the best way to make that work?
so going back to my dilemma, is there a document that describes to me the transfer of a contract so that the solar panels are still being functional rather than decorative in the back of the property?
Yeah. So you can, the question is at the end of the FIT, there's no document that says anything. They didn't think, they haven't announced what they're going to do. They're just starting to think of that, because this is a program that was started by the other government, and the government that we have now bad-mouthed it with lies. So they don't want to talk about it. But the reality is there's 30,000 microfits in the province, 7,800 FIT contracts. All of those will be producing somewhere in the range of 80% of their original generation capacity. There is declination in the generation over time, but they're 80% capable of what they were originally built for. So between now and the end of the FIT contract, if you sell your property, you can sell that FIT contract with it to the new owner. It has to stay with the owner. At the end of the FIT contract, I am certain that there is 20 to 40 years more generation out of that asset. Somebody may have to change the inverter, change some panels, but that asset is a permanent generation point as long as someone pays you for it. What's likely to happen is they will either recontract with a lower price because it's fully depreciated by you, so it should be at a lower price, or you go to net metering on the property if you have demand, or what we would recommend is that the province allow those systems to be paired with batteries and be part of a bigger virtual power plant.
Another question is, would these new contracts be annual, or would they be a decade, or?
How long's a rope? I have no idea, sir. I don't want to, I'm very careful in what I say because I don't know. There's nothing there. We either tear it out, which would be really stupid for the ratepayer and the taxpayer, or we recontract some fixed rate for a period. You do net metering, or we come to some other arrangement, a virtual power plant arrangement with a battery to time shift that generation. That, I think, is the wisest thing for us as taxpayer ratepayers.
So do you
The la-
know of any real estate agent that has information on how to
The real estate agents don't know.
price or something like that?
No, the way we price it is there's clarity between now and the FIT contract end.
Yeah.
After that, assume 40% of the value you're getting now, after that, assume whatever the retail price is. That's the most that you're going to get paid at the end of the FIT contract.
Sounds like a
Beyond-
horror show that I'm facing.
No, it's not going to be a horror show. I don't think so. I have a microfit, a 10 kilowatt ground mount on my property in Manotick. OREC has 18 FIT contracts. I'm confident that there's a revenue stream for my daughter who's taken over my business when this is when I pass. There are hydro dams that have been running for 100 years, and they'll be running for another 200 years. Because the electricity system has become used to receiving power from those sites. We need electricity. I don't believe we need the 70 to 200% increase that the government's scaring us with, because they want to build more big nuclears over there. But if we do little generation everywhere, that reduces the amount we have to ship and transport and store and balance, right? So I do not think it's going to be a problem for anyone. You have an asset that's got a long life beyond any of the people on this call.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for your comments.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay, Art?
Yeah. As about everyone on this call knows, I've been running a microgrid for about 9 years, and I did want to comment, and I thank you for addressing the VPPs, virtual power plants, working on both sides of the equation of supply equals demand, because it is managing both the demand side and the supply side. I did want to address your comment that VPPs are not allowed in Ontario, and in fact there are in fact some that have been given conditional trial licenses, and those are often going. But basically, you're quite right. It is political. Over this past period of time, I have participated and spoke with many folks in the IESO, with some in the OEB, certainly within Hydro Ottawa and Hydro One. Everyone's aware, and in fact, there's technical competence and desire to push ahead, but it's political. And we get to the point of saying it's the Minister of Energy who, in the Doug Ford environment, is in fact a climate change denier and does not want to proceed. So it's not that there's any technical reason whatsoever to go ahead and do this, and that's what some of these trials are doing, are just verifying that we can do this. And there have been, of course, some that have also worked with EV batteries and trying to get them to charge at the appropriate time and what have you. So there's been a lot of pilot programs that have gone on in Ontario, and some are going on now, and there'll be more in the future. But we're still tied to any full-scale deployment due to political considerations.
Yeah, those are all exceptional pilots, right, Art? They're all like, you can try it, but it's not officially supported yet. It's a trial. It's a proof of concept.
Correct. And as we know, politicians, even Trump isn't there forever. Okay, we know that politicians do change, and of course I live in hope. Anyway, the other thing I did want to talk about is we have, of course, this time of use pricing, which is really very beneficial. at least from my perspective, because I have a battery. What I do is I run my home on battery power from 4 in the afternoon till 9 o'clock at night, and that is peak time. If I was to use power from the grid, it would have cost me 28 cents per kilowatt hour. But fortunately, if the sun is generating power, I'm selling it to the grid at 28 cents per kilowatt hour. Then what happens come 11 o'clock at night, it goes to the ultra low overnight rates. And I am now charging my battery at 2.8 cents. That's a factor of 10. And so I'm time shifting and I'm energy trading. I'm buying and selling all day to make a profit out of all this.
You're a prosumer.
Prosumer, absolutely. And that works just fine. And I've been doing this and I'm absolutely delighted in the way it works, and I don't buy electricity, but I trade. I remain connected because I must buy and sell, and so I'm not, as it were, off grid. But the question I want to put to Dick is, when we look at a VPP, I've seen both models in use around the world. As to who is the manager, who's looking after this. Do you see, for example, OREC becoming responsible for a VPP and bringing everything together and making power available on demand when the utility asks for it, and worrying about the money and the trades and what have you? Or should this be a job done by the utility itself? And anyway, over to you.
I think it should be a job done by the utility, because it has to be done by the entity that is managing the overall system. But that requires the utility to be a participant in the system, not just the delivery mechanism. They and their incentives, their payment is on the basis that they're a passive purchaser of electricity from the provincial grid, and all they do is deliver it to our homes in a dumb one way. I'm using the word dumb, in a non-intelligent delivery of a package of kilowatts, as opposed to managing the ups and downs and balancing. When the IESO, as I understand it, when the IESO does its rate plan or its plans for electricity, it looks at Ottawa as a demand point. So it brings power to the Nepean and the Hawthorne transmission points or connection points as
Transformer state.
Transformer connection. So the interconnection point, that's the word. Those two interconnection points on the basis that they need so much power at this time of day. Full stop. You know, it's got to be more complex. It's got to be more sophisticated than that. And Hydro Ottawa's got a challenge in front of it. They have to build that up, that capability up. But we're all walking around with these cell phones. That's the change that's coming. And this is much more powerful than the mainframe computer at Arts University when he went to school.
Yeah, can I add my perspective to that? Thanks, Dick. You talked about the obstacles. I personally had experience with the Minister of Energy and Electrification and his team. I've had experience with the Ontario Energy Board. I say I, as my role of president, and with other people within OREC, not just me. We have. We've like I say, we've had meetings on Ontario Energy Board, their innovation sandbox program. We had conversations with the ISO, the regulator, on their the innovation grid innovation fund. All three of them at every stage, when we said we're looking at this community scale storage project that would help with resiliency, reduce costs, and help the province reduce their peak demand, every one of them had said, that's a great idea. We think that's good. You should go with it. It makes sense. And at least nominally, they've been in support of that. The biggest challenge we faced, frankly, is at the connection to the grid, is at the meter, we need to connect to the utility. And the utility has been the least able to help us enable such a plan by finding us a place and making a mechanism for us to pay for it. And they do have some leeway within their current restraints to explore innovative. In fact, there's a mandate to explore innovative non-wired solutions, meaning ones that aren't pulling from the transmission system. And we've had a challenge, at least with Ottawa Hydro, with Hydro Ottawa. We have said that we would be interested on the technical standpoint, to the point of who should control it, which was your question. We said we're open. We would control it and we would manage it like we manage one of our solar projects, but we appreciate that having thousands of these distributed energy systems acting independently would be a huge risk. So it's okay if you controlled it, or if you at least gave us the guardrail saying we need a switch that we can flip systems off from pulling because we've suddenly got a shortage or whatever. And we said, let us be the guinea pig. Let us be a use case for how you would coordinate that kind of electricity management. And again, they have said that's complicated, and one way or another, they have not given us a mechanism. They have not taken advantage of that offer. So in my mind, for our solutions, we need to be connected to the grid. It's not behind the meter as one institution or one consumer. And the utility is the final stopgap, the final mile, right? And that's where we're having a challenge getting our project implemented.
Okay, thank you. Good explanation.
So Ted, you have a question?
Well, I have a comment that's I'm sort of peripheral to this. If you see the picture behind me, that's my cottage. It's about 100 miles from Ottawa. And quite frankly, I keep asking myself, why the hell am I on grid? Because 90% of what I pay each year is just the price of hooking up.
Yeah.
And many of my neighbors, I'm considering just putting in a few solar panels and only running a microwave off it for 6 months of the year, and to hell with the grid. Several people up there are interested in the same thing. But I ran into this some years ago when my neighbor was building a very nice cottage, and he had no electricity on the site until he got it built. And I ran a large extension cord over to him so he could actually saw boards. And the Hydro Authority came and said, you can't do that. Yeah. He has to pay for, even if he doesn't have the wires yet, he has to pay for it, and he has to buy his electricity from them. I wasn't even selling it to him. I was just, as a nice neighbor, providing him with the power. So
you mean because it's taking place on his property?
It was taking place on his property.
Wow.
See, he had to, yeah, it was about a 100-foot extension cord to give him the ability to have a light to work in the evenings and to run his power saw. And it was made very clear to us that that was not allowed. The other point we made was I was also told when I was looking previously at getting off grid, just putting a couple of solar panels on the south side of my cottage and just running that was not considered practical, and that the local authority would not allow me to not have electricity on the site to get any insurance or to have any anyway, it got very complex. As a result, I never did do what I was going to do about 20 years ago, which was be one of the first solar people on the lake. There is a guy on the lake who is totally solar. He has been since way before I got there. And he has just one panel and he has almost nothing. And I don't even think they know he's there. because he's out at the very end of a road. But all I wanted to raise was how bureaucratic the people have been. Even to the point where here in Ottawa, some of us have looked at putting up a windmill. It was ruled not allowed. The zoning did not permit it. Ottawa has one of the most anal forms of zoning on the planet. And if it's not allowed, it's not allowed. It's not specifically, explicitly said you have to have it. You're not allowed to have it. So I sympathize with your work. That said, I may well join you guys because I think it's a great idea. And certainly CACOR can share this information, can direct people to you. And when you're putting stuff out like this, we're happy to share it around.
Terrific. Thanks for that, Ted, and appreciate your situation.
I have a quick question for you.
If I can interject for just a moment, we are spending more than half of this session on things that we can't do, partly because it's quite interesting and it's incredibly frustrating. And I spend more than half of my time at OREC on these futuristic things for all the reasons that Ted just described. And I'm quite aware of what's been going on in Europe of late. The European-wide Renewable Energy Cooperative Association called ResCoop has got the EU to pass a directive saying that every citizen and community has the right to own, operate, share, save, and store their own renewable energy. That's what we would like to eventually have in Canada. But anyway, let's put that aside.
So do we get to march on Parliament to demand this?
At some point. Right now, it's too hard to explain that to people. But I want to just point out that OREC's main focus is to build projects that are profitable and can be done today. So that's net metering, purchasing projects from people who don't know what to do with them as they go to the end of life of their FIT contract, which we know will have a value afterwards, as that gentleman I talked to earlier. So our main focus that we keep our GM focused on, she works on project development, getting projects, making them profitable, and paying dividends and capital back to our members. It's only certain people on the board who are wasting their time. We're not wasting any time on this advocacy stuff because that's what the province
we're ornery.
needs.
We're trying to make your relevancy relevant now.
If I could just have one comment here. As a recreation vehicle owner, one can, of course, take your own solar that you pile into your RV and go off wherever you are and put it up. And I would think you could do the same thing at your cottage, Ted. That you just go and
I know I can become totally independent. I may have to pay a little different insurance for different things. That's another issue. But no, we were looking at could we take the whole area off because most of us are only there for for half the year, and can we just each put solar panels in the right places and share it? And the answer was very discouraging.
Okay. So for what it's worth, that's how a lot of the co-ops grew in Europe. Was they got fed up with your utility saying, "Thou shalt," and "No, you can't." And they finally got fed up. And in one famous case, and we presented a video last year, they bought the utility and basically took over its mandate and said, "We're going to make this utility work for us rather than the other way around." And that's what these co-ops, and we have a slide, I could put it up again, about the other renewable energy co-ops across Canada that are collaborating, as well as many other around the world.
Great.
All right, Dick, I just want to ask you a quick question. How much does the function of a DER rely on a functioning internet at that time? I mean, is that a silly question? I'm sorry.
I can't answer. I'm not an engineer. I'm talking about this as a theory that is being implemented in various ways. So I know there's Octopus in Britain, there's Ohm Connect in California, and there's another firm. There was a Globe and Mail article about the Canadian Pension Fund buying Octopus, and it referred to other companies. If you do a Google search, you'll find there's quite a few companies doing virtual power plants.
So Art, do you have a comment?
But I can't comment in detail.
There are, of course, ways that this can be done, and they are being done in other jurisdictions. But again, it's one of these things that ultimately you have to have political buy-in, and that's right now the big stumbling block that we've got. And it's everything that Dick has been saying and we've been addressing. There's lots of alternatives. There's lots of technical alternatives and things to do.
Yeah, but this government has committed itself to $108 billion, if they're on time and on budget, of nuclear.
Correct.
And more gas plants.
Correct.
So,
and that's so sad.
it's such a waste of money because it's going to be double that when you consider the transmission and distribution lines. More than double. So anyway,
Are we finished with our questions, Richard?
All right. I will tell you that I'm working on a project right now that is a local community hub along with somebody else or a couple other and we're actually just getting into doing the feasibility study and so forth. And somebody mentioned that, well, we should get OREC involved, but you then would require the developer, he would then have some kind of, he'd have to pay you back for 20 years or something like that. Am I totally off base here?
It depends on what we're talking about. So is this the project?
It's a community hub. It runs a lot of programs.
Yeah.
And he's using it as a feasibility, as basically as a proof of concept for much larger expansion.
So if it's solar on the roof and we're selling that power, then that has to be of a certain size. I'd say 200 to 400 kilowatts of size to justify the expense, and it has to be paid over a certain number of years. If we're selling that power to the building, it's got to be a 20-year or longer term, and it has to be a certain size. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense because there's economies of scale in bigger systems, of course. If it's a combination of solar and other things where it's not being paid back as the sale of the electricity to the building, then it has to be some kind of financing deal. We could do an energy retrofit, windows, doors, insulation, re-roofing, and solar. So it's a total package of, say, $400,000. That again would have to be financed over a long period at an interest rate. So it depends on what we're doing and how the counterparty wants to pay for that, because we have to pay our investors, hopefully all the people on this call. So you don't want us to give away your money. You want us to earn it properly, manage it properly, and do our fiduciary responsibility to the member investors. So most of our projects are with the provincial power authority. Those are the FIT contracts. Several of them are with buildings, Museum of Science and Technology, Mer Bleu High School, and Paul Desmarais. Those three things are net metering, where we're selling the power to the building. We're getting paid per kilowatt. It's a lease arrangement, but basically we get paid for the kilowatts we deliver. And then we had 5 energy retrofit projects. Now I think there's 3 of them still in operation. Those were pure financing deals to pay for lighting and other things that the buildings wanted to do. They didn't want to pay us for the kilowatts that they were saving. They wanted to just pay a flat amount over a set period.
Sure. Yeah.
So it depends on what the client wants and what the asset is and how it can be monetized. If it's kilowatts, it's clear. If it's energy savings, that's a little less. So nobody in the energy retrofit projects, no one wanted to pay for an auditing system to make sure every unit of energy saved was was payable or monetized.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's a little
Well, I
bit
think
of
we
a
have more
long
to
answer.
talk about.
Yeah. Yes.
But anyway, at this point, Ted, I'll ask you to thank the speakers.
Oh, certainly. No, I'd be delighted to thank you for your presentation and say that we, as an organization, can certainly try to help you and share information and so on. One of the things you might be interested in is the Club of Rome internationally is collecting success stories that we can share. And we have several, we've one or two from Canada on there now. There are other ones there. We're trying to build it. And you might want to think about writing up a page or two on why this is so good, why it is definitely making a difference. And we would certainly help you share that around. And secondly, it strikes me that several of our members are now interested. And if you want to send a one-pager advertisement, essentially presenting the stuff that you've given here, but giving people an address and what you might want to do, please recruit them if you can.
Okay.
Okay. So that said, thank you again very much. Our people have stuck around and asking questions. That's always a very good sign. So thanks again. And at this point, I would also do the commercial for our outfit, asking our members to make sure you join. We are just finishing the recruitment for the year of the annual dues. And we ask other people who may be interested in some of the wonderful presentations we put on every week to also join us and share it around. And it will be shared very shortly online through our YouTube. And we would ask you to, when you do use the YouTube and share it, and please do, just say I liked it on it, and it apparently helps us get better presence in the exchange. So
Great.
thank you again. We usually have a little advertisement goes up. It didn't now. That's okay. We get it every time. But it essentially gives the specifics, and they're on our website. And we would ask everyone to continue to come to these marvelous presentations, because we're here to exchange ideas and make sure that they actually do something. So thanks again.
Thanks, Art. Thanks, Richard, for this opportunity, and it's a pleasure to speak with everybody.